Hi there, it's Mark and welcome to Book Ramble. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much. Your support really does mean a lot to this channel. And if you're new and you've not subscribed, please consider doing so. It's free and it does help the channel. Thank you very much. For the rest of the video, you won't see myself. It's a conversation I had with Steve. We worked together in the Royal Navy on HMS Charybdis back in the 1980s. And he is talking about a book that he has recently read, an excellent one. So it's audio with some images. Enjoy! Hello there, Steve.
G'day, mate. How are you?
Not too bad. Now, for those who don't know, we worked together back in the 1980s, didn't we?
We did indeed, mate.
Well, I say work.
I worked.
Yes, all right, okay. They called me Sunblessed for a reason. But it was on HMS Charybdis.
Yes.
And you stayed in longer than I did in the Navy, didn't you?
I did, yep. I served just under 9 years in the Royal Navy. I think you did around about 7, didn't you? Something like that.
And then you spent almost 4 decades being a copper, a policeman.
Captures quite a few areas of work, so I always refer to my service as 40 years of serving the Crown. That's the way I put it, because that then leaves it quite bland, doesn't it?
And diplomatic, because you used to say serving the Queen, but of course times moved on.
Yep, so it has to be serving the Crown, yeah.
And we've always liked history. We used to talk history back in the day. And you've kindly agreed to come on and talk about a book that you've just read. I think it's called 10 Men Had to Die?
1 in 10 had to die.
1 in 10 had to die. So what's it about?
So it's a book written by a guy called Per Hanssen, and it basically is looking at the Atlantic merchant convoys that ran in the 1940s between the United States and Britain. And it's a story, so it's a fictional story, but it's drawn from first-hand accounts of merchant seamen who got involved in those sort of slow convoys that tracked all the way through, and who tried to outrun or outflank the U-boats, the wolf packs that hunted in the Atlantic. And so this story is based around a group of men and a crew who sit on a Norwegian freighter. And the freighter is called Anna, A-N-N-A. And one of the nice things about Anna is you can spell it forwards and backwards. It's those words.
Okay.
So a bit like radar.
Yes.
And anyway, what it talks about is it goes into the sort of life of some of those folk on board, and it tries to sort of grab some of the fear, some of the tension, some of the angst that the people were living with while they were trudging across the Atlantic. And the particular thing with the Anna is that she wasn't carrying lumber or she wasn't carrying grain. She was actually a munition ship. And so munition ships, if they were hit, that was it. Good night, Vienna. They just single torpedo, smash through, and everybody would be dead very, very, very quickly.
So am I correct in thinking that the author may be Norwegian?
Yeah, you would indeed be very correct in thinking that. And he's giving a very interesting account based on his personal sort of research. And right at the end of the book, there is a chap called Leif Heimstadt, who says, I'm one of those who sailed in these convoys, one of those who have been permanently damaged by the mental and physical strain. I have read Per Hanssen's book in manuscript, and I can assure the reader that he tells the truth about the thousands of Norwegian seamen and what they endured during the war. It is almost as if I sailed in Anna, working and struggling with all the nameless men in her. And so the accounts are really vivid. But what caught me personally was the way it was written. So this was first published in 1970.
Right.
And it's one of those books that sits on my bookcase, which I've slowly worked my way along to. But it's written in a way that you don't ever know the names of people on the ship.
Right.
So you get referred to the carpenter, the chippy. You get referred to AB, and obviously AB is an able rate,
Right.
somebody on there. The donkeyman, which is a great term, isn't it? The donkeyman, but basically a donkeyman is somebody who was responsible to work in the engine room.
Oh, we never used that term, did we? We never had that.
No, it's not a term that we used.
Okay.
No, it's not a term that we used. But the donkeyman was a greaser, basically. We talk about greasy stokers and all the rest of it.
One
we?
cell.
But, yeah, that's right. But donkeyman wasn't one of our terms when we were in. It talks about the second mate, the first mate. It talks about the skipper, obviously chief officers. But nobody is identified with an individual name, and which I thought was a really neat literary trick.
Yeah, it's one I used as well in parts of my books. Why did you like that?
Because what it did. Now, let's sort of cast our mind back. So back in the 80s when we served, we would go and do our Miller patrol, and we would be protecting convoys going up through the Straits of Hormuz between warring factions. And that would involve going through areas that were often illuminated by fire control radar from missile sites. It would involve going through potentially mined areas. And it would also involve having to stick searchlights on what was the NATO code word for fast attack boats. We called them bog hammers. That was the NATO code word for them, bog hammers. So the whole concept, I could see us in. I could see me in. I could see the people that I've worked with in.
Right.
And because there's no personal names, when it talks about the bosun, instantly my mind would go to the bosun on the bridge. When it talks about the skipper, I'd be reflecting on the skipper. When it talks about the radio and the signals guy, I'd be thinking of radios and signals guys. Able rate to a seaman. Then there were a number of seamen who came into my mind as to, that would be that guy. And so I could personalise what the writer hadn't. And I liked that. I thought that was really neat because it drew me into the story. So not only was the concept of the story of the Convoys something that I could personally relate to, but I could also put a name and a face to those titles, which was quite interactive.
Does he try to give characterizations to them?
Very little. So you can draw a lot of it on your from your own imagination. I mean, he will give some descriptions around what they looked like. He will describe, so the donkeyman was always very bad-tempered. The AB was very big-headed. He had a large head, and he sort of sloped his shoulders forwards, and he was always talking about his wife and his daughter, and always telling stories about his wife and his daughter. And again, I can picture those sorts of conversations going on down the mess deck, because these are the sorts of conversations that we had. And not just you and I, but people that we worked alongside. One of the other characters that he talked about was the boy, and the boy was the little 16-year-old that had come onto the ship, and that's how he's described. The boy. That's all we know about him. He's just the boy, and the boy obviously gets a bit fed up because he's not been treated like a man, and wants to go for a run ashore with the lads, and then they hook him up with a prostitute and all of this sort of thing, And I thought to myself, goodness gracious, I've seen all of that play out. I've seen all of those things play out,
The 16-year-old, I wasn't 16 when I got onto a ship, I was 17, but you were, weren't you?
Yeah, I was 16,
Wow.
yeah. So it was interesting, just the way that it drew me in. One of the things that I always look for in the book, one, it's got to capture my imagination. So there's got to be something in the storyline that hooks me to capture my imagination. There's got to be characters that I can start to buy into, that I can resonate with in some way, or that I can see other people that I know in them. And so those are two really big draw points for me. So the story can be about anything, but as long as the concept interests me, and as long as the people interest me, then I'll continue to read.
And did it?
And yeah, it did. It was quite a surprise. Like I said, this is from the sort of middle of my second row of one of my bookcases. And I was expecting it to be one of those, oh my goodness, here we go, this is going to be a drag trying to read through this. But it just caught my imagination, just from the way that it started. 36 grey ships on a grey sea beneath a grey sky. Aboard these 36 ships, more than 1,000 men in constant expectation of being torpedoed.
Yeah, it's a good start, isn't it?
And I thought, ooh, that's good. Old ships, new ships, small ships, large, heading for England at 7 knots. And it was now 6 days and nights since they had left the coast of America. So, without saying much, the scene is set.
That's
7 knots.
Slow.
So they were called SCs. They were slow convoys. And the SCs were just like cannon fodder for the U-boats. They would just pick them off. And once the U-boats started to get a sniff of where a convoy was, the wolf packs would close in and they would just take them out one after the other, after the other, after the other. And they're tragic, absolutely tragic.
I was going to say, the Battle of the Atlantic is what it's called. The convoy system was part of it. 72,000 Allied naval and merchant seamen perished, along with 30,000 German U-boat sailors. Over 100,000 men lost their lives. The Royal Australian Air Force, over 400 members were part of the Coastal Command Squadron, and they were killed. And there would have been Kiwis there as well. Yeah,
there were definitely new Kiwis on these boats. One of the next book that I'm reading up at the moment, which I won't go into, but that's looking at convoys, etc., and that's got New Zealand naval ratings involved in that. But I think one of the sad things about the whole of this book, and this is sort of fast forwarding all the way through, is that this is just focusing on one group of people. This is Norwegian sailors, and the Norwegian authorities didn't do anything for their disabled wartime seamen. There was no recognition for them, no granting of pensions.
Whatever.
Well, whether there is now, I don't know. But back at the time that this book was written, I don't know what happened, whether there's any recap on it. But that's part and parcel of the story of this. And I think that's part of the reason why Per Hanssen wrote the book, to try and raise awareness of what these men went through.
Right.
That they never had any recognition for it.
3,500 of them, supposedly.
Is that right?
Yeah, merchantmen with a total of 10,000 Norwegian deaths in the war. It's amazing, isn't it? The loss of life and the ship sunk was catastrophic. I mean, they reckon they lost 175 warships over the campaign, and tactics changed because you mentioned the word Wolfpack, which was the German Unter die Seebooten, the U-boats getting together.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Really perfecting their art of trying to get hold of these ships. Imagine going across the Atlantic at 7 knots and knowing that any moment, preferably, I wouldn't say preferably, possibly when you were asleep, because they tended to attack at night, didn't they?
Yeah, and so part and parcel of sort of building up the tension in this novel is that you would have people asleep in their life jackets, fully clothed, asleep by the life rafts, not in the mess decks, not below decks, anywhere that they could lay down where there might be the opportunity for them to get off the vessel in the event that the vessel sunk. And let's face it, once those ships are hit by torpedoes, whether it's one torpedo, 2 or 3, or however many they manage to ram into it, it doesn't take that long for a vessel to sink. And if you were like the donkeyman down in the engine rooms and a torpedo rips through, mate,
you're not going to get out.
Your survival rate is very, very limited. So coming on watch, getting off watch, I guess every time you came off watch, it was like a scramble to get up top, get your life jacket back on, and actually know that for the next 4 hours, if anything happens, you might be able to get away. I guess the ball acher would be if you'd just come on watch and then the forbidden thing got torpedoed and your oppo's just been relieved and he's gone up there and he's all right, Jack, but you're not.
Does it give you any maps of the routes? Because they tended to go quite far north, didn't they? Because into cold waters.
They did. They tracked north, so they'd often track north and then sort of drift back round into sort of Liverpool and places like that where they would unload.
And what happens to this ship? Does it survive?
Yes, this one does. I don't know really whether you'd want me to go through to the end of the story, to be honest, because it's some of the characters in it obviously have a different type of journey. I don't know what you want for your channel. Did you want to sort of spoil the endings and put out spoilers and that sort of thing?
Listen, mate, you must have listened to some. I'm spoiling everything I ever talk about. So.
Yeah, but that's part of the course for you, mate.
That's right. Yes,
I
give it away. Listen. You know these posters, loose lips.
Yeah, loose lips sink ships.
That'll be me. Yeah,
that'll be you. Yeah, so Convoy would not be safe in your hands, would it?
No, not at all.
But yeah, so I mean, you pick up on a number of these different characters, obviously, and you get to see a little bit about how they interact with one another. I talked about the boy who wants to become a man and actually, cut his stuff. You've got the chief who obviously looks after the engine room. You've got the cook who it gets injured and that sort of thing. You've got the carpenter and the bosun, and you've also got the skipper, and you've got this character called AB. And say the Abel Rate, who is quite a pivotal character throughout the story of the book because of the way that he brings a little bit of, I don't know, wishing hope into the mess deck when he talks about, this is, my wife, she's going to be here, she's going to be doing this, and my little daughter's going to be, and he sort of spins a story around his little family group that all of the other guys in the mess sort of hang on to, and well, tell us more about the little girl. What is she doing now? He goes, right at the moment, and so he's adding some sort of hope. But the sad thing is he's under so much pressure, and he's under so much psychological stress that he actually hangs himself in one of the forward compartments.
Right.
And of course, then their sort of centre of hope has been destroyed as well. So not only has he taken his own life, not only has he now widowed his wife and made his daughter fatherless, he's also taken something from the crew as well. And again, that type of thing I saw happen in our service, with people under such pressure in certain situations. There was a guy on one of the other destroyers that I served who just completely lost the plot and just flipped out in the operations room. Ended up being taken off the ship quite rapidly. And I know what it's like to work under intense pressure, and I know what it's like to work under not only physical but psychological pressure. In fact, the psychological pressure is often worse because you conjure up so many things in your mind. And so when I was reading this guy, I thought, you poor blighter, you poor blighter. But then when they bury him, they take him and they bury him in a foreign part somewhere, the church won't let him be buried within the confines of the graveyard because he's somebody who's committed suicide. Right. And I'd forgotten about that. I'd forgotten that the church would not allow people who had committed suicide to be buried on consecrated ground.
Was that still a thing in the war then?
That was, yeah.
I thought they got rid of it. Oh, right.
No, they hadn't. So consecrated ground you couldn't bury. So that was something that sort of jerked my attention as well, and I thought to myself, gosh, yeah, that wasn't that many years ago, was it, that was still happening? And this whole idea of consecrated ground. So they would then get some sort of conversation going between the priest and the skipper, and they managed to negotiate a plot by the church wall, on the inside of the church wall, on the condition that when the war's finished, he's brought out of his grave and taken back to Norway and buried back in Norway. So that all goes on, which I found that whole concept interesting for lots of reasons, and the conversation that was being had with the skipper and the clergy, and then the response that the skipper gives to the crew. And what does he say? He says to the crew, the skipper made a sort of speech, and that done, he picked up a camera that he'd put on the ground beside him and took photographs of the coffin. He looked sternly, almost threateningly, at the ring of men around the open grave, and he said that if any of them got back to Norway, they were to tell AB's wife and girl that AB had been killed in an accident on board. And I thought to myself, trying to maintain the honour of the man who had done so much, had travelled so many times across the Atlantic in the face of so much danger, and the fact that he had cracked was not a reflection of who he was. And so the skipper was trying to keep his honour alive. And I thought to myself, that's good. I like that. You don't announce the shortcomings of somebody or what you think is a weakness of somebody because, one, you're not in their head and you don't know what's going on. And two, he'd been doing all of these convoy runs for a long time. So I thought it was a nice touch in the storyline.
So I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Steve. I'm always of the opinion that when you tend to read factual books of the war, that's always left out. The emotional weight. And I wonder if it's because a lot of the authors have never served at sea or been in the forces to know what it's like when you're under pressure, you could possibly die tomorrow, and you're a long way from home.
Yeah, and I think that being in those experiences that, say, both you and I have had over the years of our service, there were moments where if it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. Whether it's a engine room fire, whether it's a collision, these are peacetime incidents, whether it's just incredibly bad weather and the ship just doesn't take it very well. I mean, I have been sat on the bridge of the ship to have the ship knocked so many degrees to starboard that all I could see is green water out the starboard window and all I could see is the sky out the port window and was clinging for forbidden grim death. And I thought that we were going to go over. And the captain thought we were going to go over. And then you're stuck in a flipped ship just waiting to die. Because the chances of getting out are going to be real slim. Real slim. And when you think about these guys that are in engine compartments like 3, 4, 5, 40 feet, 50 feet below the waterline, tragic, man, tragic. So the actual stress factors that you can feel, the living in that permanent state of anxiety is really bad for you.
It is.
It's really bad for you.
It does, yeah.
I mean, you know from some of the work that I have been involved in over the years that you have to have a real heightened sense of tension about you to keep you sharp and keep you on edge and keep you ready to respond. The problem is when that's all the time and when you are constantly living on edge and always ready to go, it does you no good. It does you no good in the long run, mate. It really doesn't. So knowing the type of environment, having sailed the Atlantic Ocean on numerous occasions, having been in various closed down compartments on a ship, having gone through escorted convoys, through war zones and all the rest of it. Yeah, there's quite a resonance in there, which I was not expecting. So I thought the book was thoroughly good. It raised the awareness for me of the Norwegian crews that were involved in it. It learnt a lot about the slow convoys, the SCs that went across the Atlantic, the way that the U-boats harassed and stalked them. There's actually there's a film on Apple TV with Tom Hanks in it called Greyhound, and that's really worth a watch, and that brings some of the realism, I suppose, to what would have likely gone on.
Does it say at any point how many convoys this thing did or would have done?
No, because it's a fictional book, but what it does say is at the end is half the crew signed off in New York. But those who stayed in Anna included carpenter, bosun, the boy, the chief, the cook, and the skipper. And then it closes with how it began. 36 grey ships, or was it 46 this time, sailed on a grey sea beneath grey skies. In them were over 1,000 men in constant expectation of being torpedoed. Old ships and new ships, small ships and large ships, sailed for England at 7 knots. A slow convoy. So you've got that cyclical thing. So they'd left the coast of America, sailed for England. Yeah,
very
good.
Very good. So you'd recommend it then?
I'd recommend it. Yeah, any interested in maritime history, if you've got any interest in the Second World War, if you've got any interest in learning a little bit more about what the merchant seamen did and how they supported the war effort from the Atlantic into the UK, into Great Britain as it was, Yeah, very worth reading. It's right up there with The Cruel Sea.
Oh, Montserrat. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
very good. HMS
Yes.
Compass Rose.
Yes. No, it's good. It's a good book, mate.
Yeah.
A surprising little find in my bookcase.
So just before you sign off then, you're doing a thing that is often on BookTube about read what you own.
Yes.
So how many do you own and how many are you planning to read this year?
Well, I reckon I probably own upwards of a couple of thousand books, I think. I've got quite extensive, well, you can see in the picture behind me.
I can see so many of them.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 6 rows. Bookcase is 6 foot tall. I've got another 2 bookcases in here, 3 bookcases in here, which is 1, 2, 3. That's another 9 shelves there. Then I've got 1, 2, 4, 5 bookcases in the house, all full of books. So I've got thousands of books. It was when I was made redundant, when I took redundancy, that I sat in my study looking across at the bookcase opposite me, and the top shelf was things of my grandfather's. So they were Agatha Christie books, old paperbacks, Edgar Wallace books, Howard Spring, a whole range of books from the sort of 40s and 50s. And I sat here and I thought, you know what? I don't think I've ever read them. And so I decided to just start at the left and work my way to the right and go across each shelf. So I've taken in quite a few books over the last sort of 18 months, probably 2 years when I started doing this. I think I read 80 odd books last year.
For those who know, Steve is a collector. He's got a book that I gave him back in 1985. I can't believe it.
I do indeed. It's down
It's
here.
unbelievable.
Down here.
And books you had as a child.
I love them. I love books. They're fantastic.
Well, thank you very much. Since you've now broken your duck and you've appeared on Book-ramble, you will have to come on again.
Always a pleasure, Mark. Never a chore.
Yes.
Tell your listeners to see if they can get hold of a copy. It's a good book.
Yes. And thank you very much for the insight.
Pleasure, mate. You take care.
Ta-ta for now.
Bye-bye now.